Hello everyone, welcome back to Clinical Psychology Community UK, and today it's a Monday, it's another video, and today we're going to be looking at an introduction to CFT. My name's Holly, I'm with you today, and I'm an assistant psychologist within the NHS currently. So don't forget to follow us on all of the social media. We've just hit 1,000 subscribers on Instagram, so thank you so much to all of the followers on there. And part of that, we're doing a 1,000 follower giveaway. All you need to do, all the information is on the Instagram page, and I will be giving away the Surviving Clinical Psychology book that I've just done a review on. So make sure you follow us for all of the other giveaways that we do and all of the content that we're posting on there. And don't forget to subscribe to us so you get all of the updates on all of our new videos. Let's get straight to it. So today we are going to introduce you to CFT theory, compassion focused therapy. That's what we're going to introduce you to. We're going to look at some of the key principles as part of compassion focused therapy. We are going to have a brief gander into formulation for CFT, and we're going to look at some of the applications of this model. And then we're going to give it a good old Clinical Psychology Community UK critique. So we're going to look at some of the strengths and limitations. Okay, let's get started. What is CFT? It's compassion focused therapy. That's what the C, the F and the T stand for. It was introduced by Paul Gilbert in 2009. And it is essentially, there's a lot of long words here, but I'll break it down. So it's an integrative model that incorporates elements from CBT, evolutionary psychology, social psychology, neuroscience, and developmental psychology. So integrative model, it means that it integrates these different models. So it combines lots of different approaches. And it incorporates elements from the elements that I just mentioned. So CBT, evolutionary psychology, social psychology, neuroscience, developmental psychology. It also has a lot of roots in like Buddhist approaches, because a lot of mindfulness and compassion it is part of Buddhism as well. So there's some stuff in Buddhist theory that is also in CFT. The core component is compassionate mind training, to develop a compassionate mind towards oneself and to others, to help people alleviate their suffering using compassion. And I'm not going to go into exactly how it was developed and everything, but compassionate mind training is the sort of precursor to CFT, if you like. If anyone is interested, and I do reference this book at the end, The Compassionate Mind by Paul Gilbert. Again, I'm not sponsored, but The Compassionate Mind by Paul Gilbert is on my reading list. I've got it right here. I'm ready to read it. And it's been highly recommended to me if you're at all interested in compassion focused therapy. So have a look at that, and that might be able to explain a little bit more. But essentially, compassionate mind training was the precursor to CFT. Moving on, let's look at the key principles. Okay, so the key idea is that we have 3 different brain systems that we use for managing emotional states. So the first one is threat. Okay, this is like the automatic immediate one. And this is all about keeping us safe, essentially, and making sure that we survive. So if you know anything about the anxiety response, you know, when we are faced with a stimulus that's really scary, we either fight it, or we flight, we run away, or we freeze. You know, that's the anxiety response. So that represents, that's the word I wanted, represents your threat system being activated. It's when your anxiety response is activated. And then we have the drive system. So this motivates you for everything when your survival stuff is taken care of. So once you feel safe, once your threat system is no longer active, your drive system can then be activated. So this is things like, well, for a lot of us aspiring psychologists, it's, you know, the drive to get onto the doctorate, you know, why we want to get onto the doctorate, why we want to succeed and achieve our goals in life. It's that sort of thing, what drives you. It could be getting a new haircut, giving blood. It could be getting a new car, you know, renovating your house. It could be anything that sort of motivates you and gives you an incentive. So that's the drive system. And then we have the soothing system. Now, the soothing system is like our affiliative resource system. So it's relational, and it basically is activated when we feel connected to other people, and it's our calming soothing, restorative system, as we all need. This is the idea, is that we have these brain systems, as per evolution. This is how we've evolved, and these are the brain systems that we have. So threat is all about your survival, drive is all about the things that you want to do, and soothing is all about, keeping you calm and relaxed and safe and connected to other people. So we want all of the systems to be vaguely the same size. What you can imagine is, imagine a stool with 3 legs. You have the threat system, the drive system, and the soothing system. Well, if they're all balanced, that's great. The stool will sit up straight. If not, then it will be wobbly. If your threat system is absolutely huge compared to your soothing system, it's going to be wobbly, if that makes sense. For an example, during the pandemic, okay, this is a really referenceable example for us all. We all understand this, we can relate. You might have found that your threat system was massive. Particularly at the start of the pandemic, you might have thought, 1, I'm at risk from this virus. 2, everyone I love is at risk from this virus. I can't be close to anyone. It's physical risk, and that might have been even heightened if you had to shield or you were part of one of the vulnerable groups. That could have made you feel even more under threat. Then looking at drive, the drive system is most likely much smaller. We weren't able to go and do the things that we enjoyed doing. It might be that you had a wedding coming up and you weren't able to do that anymore, or you had a gig coming up that you were going to go to, but you can't do that anymore. You were going to buy a house and that got scuppered up, and all of this stuff. Our drive, we didn't have as many incentives out there because we were restricted. And it might be, soothing might have been a lot worse because we're not able to see our family. We're not able to connect with other people in the same way that we were. I didn't see my family for 3 months at the start of sort of 2020, the start of the pandemic. I didn't see my family for 3 months, and we're quite close. So it's been really difficult, and that means that system is probably a lot smaller than it would be normally. And then you think about all of the other messaging that we get from the pandemic. I stopped myself looking at news because I felt massively anxious and under threat whenever I watched the news, because it was too stressful for me. So I tried not to do that, and I did find that my threat system shrunk. So that's kind of the key principle, is that we have these 3 brain systems, and that they'll change throughout the course of a day, depending on whatever the situation you're in. But ideally, we want to try and keep these as in balance as possible, and roughly equal size. That's essentially what we're doing. Moving on to formulation. So case formulation in CFT is based on 2 ways. You can have either the threat-focused and historically based way of doing the formulations, or you can look at the balance of brain and motivational systems. I will give you some examples of each of these, so it will hopefully make a little bit of sense. Some of the key characteristics is collaborative. All right, so the therapist is not sat on a chair while the client is sat on a chaise longue, just reading out their thoughts, and the therapist is not the expert. You're both experts together. That's, and you're doing this work collaboratively. Themes emerge in the therapy session. So the idea is not that the therapist will work on the formulation in between necessarily, like some other models might suggest. What it is that the formulation is really open and sort of transparent between the client and the therapist, and that throughout the therapy, themes will emerge, and the formulation is dynamic and can change. Like I say, it's flexible and it's non-formulaic a lot of the time. Like the CBT model, CBT, so cognitive behavioural therapy, can be quite formulaic in the way that it does things. Thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, behaviour, situation, triggers, core beliefs. It can be quite formulaic, whereas this isn't necessarily. And the important thing is that language should be de-shaming. So the whole idea is that CFT is a sort of transdiagnostic approach, basically. So it's not based on having a diagnosis, and that CFT can work quite well with people with whatever diagnosis that have high levels of shame and self-criticism. So the role of the therapist partly is to de-shame them, and to validate how they're feeling, and to try and make, help them become less self-critical. So language should be de-shaming. So you shouldn't be using words like, negative thinking patterns or cognitive distortions, because that kind of lays the blame at the person for their thoughts. That's the idea behind it. If you're not quite sure what formulation is, or you want a little bit more information on psychological formulation, I've done a video on the YouTube channel, and I'll make sure I link it at the end and in the description as well. Hopefully that'll help a little bit. So let's look at an example. Okay, let's look at a case study. So we've got Mavis. Okay, she is a 69-year-old woman. She has presented with hoarding behaviours, but was within a primary care setting. All right, this was, not evidence-based for her to be within primary care. The formulation was completed as part of a referral to secondary care, and we identified high levels of shame and self-criticism related to clutter and the state of the house. That's the language that she used, which is why it's in quotes. I quite like using quotes in formulations because it really helps you understand the language that the client uses, rather than something I've paraphrased and put into my language. So I try and use their language as much as possible. We used a historical threat-focused approach to make sense of the hoarding and to hopefully make a little bit of a plan for secondary care. That was the idea. I should just say this is a real case study, but I have made some changes to protect confidentiality as well, so don't panic. Okay, so this is looking at the 3 systems model. Okay, let's look at threat. So for her, hoarding was a way of protecting herself. It was a way that she felt safe, was hoarding the stuff. And the idea that someone takes her hoard away or messes with her clutter, tidies it, organizes it, is terrifying to her. It massively causes her a huge increase in anxiety. So her threat system's activated. Lots of the thoughts that she has: other people will take my hoard away, what a mental health service intervention is going to be like, because we did discuss that a lot of interventions for hoarding involve going through a lot of the hoard, getting rid of stuff, and that is very challenging. So that was something that made her very anxious. People will judge her. If any professional came into her home, she feels that they would judge her. She feels that she would lose control. She would feel unsafe. She doesn't trust anyone else. She feels disgusted with herself, actually. There you go. Then you see the shame and self-criticism, and she feels angry towards herself. Some of the feelings that she has: shame, anger, loneliness, fear, anxiety, distrust in others. So that's how her threat system is part of this, and it's definitely the biggest system that's at play here. Moving on to the drive system. She is motivated to change. She wants to live a better quality of life, but she does have that motivation to hoard. And part of that is not just about safety. Some of it is about the material drive of having those possessions. So that's an important part of this as well. Some of the feelings that she has: low energy, anhedonia, so that's loss of interest in things, basically. So she might experience that as part of her drive, but she also might experience some sort of feelings of feeling motivated. Now, thinking about her soothing, she was not allowing any soothing at all, meaning that she felt very unsafe and very disconnected. She happened to have fallen out with a lot of people in her life due to the hoard. They tried to help, and she did not feel that it was helping. So she has no connection to anyone else, made 10 times worse by the pandemic. She was part of a church, a local church, but they weren't able to meet because of the pandemic for a long time, which meant that she actually wasn't having any social contact at all. So that's kind of the idea. That's how you can kind of formulate using the 3 systems. And the way that what this did to help was that we realized that Mavis was living her way was further isolating her and making her constantly feel different. Normal people don't feel like this. I'm a disgrace. and everything in her history was perpetuating her shame and her high levels of self-criticism. But what we did find is that talking about this in this way kind of validated how she felt, that it was kind of a normal way to think about things, that we all have this threat response. She kind of felt connected to other people again, a renewed sense of connection, because she realized that the way she felt was normal and it was a part of the human experience. So that kind of reduced her anxiety a little bit, and definitely reduced her shame and self-criticism a bit. So there is some therapeutic benefit of doing a formulation like this, particularly being open and collaborative with the client. But sometimes, you can formulate in this way, which helps you really map out the problem. Or there is another way you can formulate. As I said, there are two different ways. So let's have a look at the other way. Okay. I know this is a huge lot of information. I appreciate that. I will talk you through it. Do not worry. Okay, so starting in this left-hand column, we've got key historical influences. This is the historical threat-focused way of formulating, all right? So her key historical influences, her hoarding began when the abusive marriage broke down. She lived alone ever since, and that's coming up, I think it was 30 or 40 years now she's been living on her own since her marriage broke down, and has been hoarding ever since. And as we know, hoarding is a progressive condition. She suffered from physical and emotional abuse from her father. She has a lack of social support around her, and a lack of sort of friends around her. Lots of social isolation going on. She also harboured some beliefs about gender roles. Being a 69-year-old woman, slightly different way of looking at the world than I had, for example, and particularly with her experience of being in the church, quite stereotypical gender roles. And she felt that she was failing because she was not able to live up to those gender roles, because her house was a mess. She wasn't being a good housekeeper. She didn't have a husband to look after, that sort of stuff. So that definitely played into the fear and the shame, self-criticism. She also felt a lot of experience that other people were dangerous and harmful. Thinking about her friend who wanted to tidy up her hoard, the abuse that she suffered from her father, the abusive marriage. She definitely had the experience that other people are dangerous. And she also had a pretty poor track record with mental health services. And my hypothesis is that this hadn't been picked up, the hoarding hadn't been picked up, and she was in treatment for low mood. And actually what it was is hoarding related low mood. And you can give someone as many antidepressants or therapy as you want, but if the root of the problem, i.e. the hoarding, which is the root of the low mood, but then the root of the hoarding also needs to be managed. Anyway, so those are the key historical influences that we wanted to consider. Now, thinking about the key fears and threats. So you're in the second column now, looking down. You've got external and internal. So thinking about external, other people will take her hoard away, is how she felt. People will judge her. She will experience rejection from other people. Other people will hurt her and are not to be trusted. And there's physical danger due to the clutter. So, she's 69, she didn't have very good mobility. She was unable, she had to climb over the clutter to be able to access stuff, which represented a massive physical risk for me when I was writing my risk assessment on this. Internally, the key fears and threats, she fears massive fear of losing control, because hoarding is a lot about gaining that control, and she feels that she's going to lose it if she loses her hoard. And therefore that makes her feel really unsafe. Going back to what we spoke about in terms of the gender role beliefs and the general situation, discussed with self, shame and self-criticism, thoughts, I'm useless, I'm a failure, that sort of thing, are in the key fears and threats that are important for her, that activate her threat system. And because hoarding and the situation that she was in, her threat system was the biggest system, this would have made sense to do this formulation as well. Now, thinking about some protective and safety strategies that she had employed, both externally and internally. She avoided other people. She wouldn't let other people around to her house. She isolated herself. She was smoking to help her cope, because they gave her a lift when she smoked. She's got medication from her GP for her low mood and for sleep. Seeking support from mental health services. So those are some things that she's already done. As you can see, some might be helpful, Some might not be helpful, but these are just non-judgmentally writing down all of the safety strategies that she's employed. And internally, she would criticize herself and distract herself to avoid thinking about her situation. She would often say that she would watch the TV because she could put blinkers on and just not look at anything around her and get completely distracted in the program that she was watching. But as part of this, she was suppressing her own needs, not looking after herself in terms of feeding herself right, because she just wanted to shut everything out because she couldn't cope with it. And then we think about the unintended consequences of all of these reactions. So the protective and safety strategies. What are the unintended consequences? Well, externally, she's isolated. She's disconnected from the world, from her friends, from the church, from everyone. Internally, she feels lonely. She feels angry at herself, and the emotions build up, and then we get to crisis point. Now, self-to-self relating is how we relate to ourselves. How do we speak to ourselves? And invariably with Mavis, she was being horrible to herself on the daily basis, which, I asked her, would she ever speak to a friend the way that she speaks to herself? And she would never do that. Like lots of us wouldn't. We'd speak to ourselves a lot more harshly than we would speak to our friends. And that's exactly what was happening here. And the impact was that she had a decrease in mood, which perpetuated her internal fears because she felt so low that actually she was anxious as well, that she was going to lose control, and it all perpetuates itself. So most often this is how a historically driven threat-focused formulation is written. And I know it looks like a lot of information, but hopefully breaking it down made a little bit of sense. So that's an example for you. Moving on to some of the techniques in CFT. Well, we're looking at compassionate imagery, which is an idea to have an image in your mind, a compassionate image that you can go to, kind of like a happy place. But you think of a place where feelings of soothing and calmness and connectedness, connection, can be stimulated. All right, so there are 3 different ways. So you have others to self, so an ideal compassionate other. So what you're imagining here is, what is an ideal, how would we ideally like to be treated by someone else? Let's imagine the most compassionate person we can. How would they speak to me? If I'm feeling overwhelmed, is there a place I can go in my head where I can imagine this really compassionate person talking to me and making me feel a bit more soothed and calm and connected? For some people, it might be a parent, it could be a best friend, it could even be an ideal version of yourself. It could be anything, but you take some time to build this image. The other one is self to others. So what would you ideally look like if you were being your ideal self, the best person you could be, the most compassionate version of yourself? What would that look like? And imagine it and kind of visualize what you would be, how you would act in certain situations. And then we have self to self. So self-compassion, how we speak to ourselves and how we can be more compassionate to ourselves. Now, as you can see, I think this steps up. So others to self, thinking of what an ideal compassionate other person might be, is infinitely easier than trying to be compassionate towards myself. And I think they do get more difficult as you go up. But the whole idea in this therapy is, one of the techniques is to build a compassionate image that helps you activate your soothing system and reduce your threat system. Compassionate letter writing, again, this is sort of the same thing, but it helps people engage with their problem. It helps them focus on the problem with an understanding and warmth and compassion that they might not have had. And it also helps them speak to themselves in a different way because they write the letter to themselves. And we encourage people to write the letter to themselves compassionately. So using language like, it is understandable that you are feeling X. We understand why you feel X. Whatever it is, unhappy, rejected, sad, whatever it is. Validating how they feel, because writing to yourself that you validate your feelings is actually quite powerful. And then we've got attention training and mindfulness. So CFT promotes that clients to notice where their attention tends to be focused, and it practices being attentive to things that elicit feelings of soothing. Kind of like the compassionate imagery sort of thing. These are just some of the techniques. As I say, there is lots of information out there about CFT if you want to find out anything more. This is just a brief introductory video. Looking at some of the applications of CFT then. So it can be, delivered individually or in a group setting. By an appropriately qualified member of staff who's done the training and is accredited. It's transdiagnostic, as I've said. So evidence shows that it's most successful for people that are high in self-criticism and shame as well. But it has been applied to lots of different settings. For example, people with eating disorders are very commonly high in self-criticism and shame. There's quite a lot of evidence behind it there, and lots of other presentations, if you like. I try not to say disorders, presentations. Most of the research is in anxiety, depression and distress, though, associated with physical health conditions like cancer. That is where most of the research is, but it is being amplified out. It's being not exaggerated, it's being rolled out and researched in lots of other presentations. Moving on to some of the strengths then. I really enjoy the CFT model, personally. I think it's accessible and it's feasible as a psychotherapy approach. That's what all of the evidence says anyway at the moment. It's relatively short term, 4 to 12 weeks, but the average is 8 weeks. So that's good for services and professionals, and if it can be effective within those ranges, those time ranges, and then that can be really cost effective as well. As horrible as the term cost effective is in a person-centered way of thinking, it is a consideration these services have to have. We can't just ignore it because we don't like it. It is a massive part of mental health service delivery in this country. There is an emerging evidence base, but it's not quite yet an evidence-based intervention. It's emerging, more research is needed, more randomized controlled trials are needed, but it's coming, hopefully. Hopefully it is happening. It also teaches techniques that clients can practice post-therapy, compassionate imagery, mindfulness. They are techniques that they can use in future situations. And I always think that there's such value in that, in therapeutic approaches. It's logical. It makes sense. It makes sense to reduce our distress and shrink our threat system. We should be nicer to ourselves. Yeah, it makes sense. I'm into it. Some of the limitations, though, we've still got to talk about this. As I said, it's not yet evidence-based. More research is needed. We need more research on the effectiveness of CFT, both in group and in individual settings. We need to understand how it works in a range of presentations and whether it's effective. Anxiety, depression, eating issues, body image, schizophrenia, personality disorder, offenders, autism. We need to know whether it works in lots of different presentations, and if not, why not? And in a range of populations, as I said, whether it's with children, is this a concept that's a bit tricky for kids to understand, or can it be adapted for children? What about older adults? What about working age adults? We need to look at all of this. It's not yet a recommended therapy. If you look at any of the guidance, it's not even on the horizon to be recommended yet because the evidence base is just not there, which is a shame. But in terms of other limitations, I think it can be a really useful model. I think it can be really useful for a lot of people, particularly in our society. In the UK, we're, quite often brought up to be quite self-deprecating. And I think that's why this resonates with me quite a lot, because I think historically I have been quite self-deprecating. So I think that's why it fits with me. Okay, then let's do a little summary. So CFT is a relatively new psychotherapeutic approach, introduced in 2009. So relatively new, although we're getting up there now in the 2021. It's transdiagnostic and appears to be the most effective for people with high levels of shame and self-criticism. More research is needed to establish a robust evidence base. Here are some helpful resources and references. They're all Gilbert, but there's loads and loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of stuff out there if you want it. Again, the book is brilliant. I'm yet to read, but I've been recommended here many times to read it. I've given it a little flick through, but it is quite a chunky book. But highly recommend if you're interested in this approach at all. Thank you so much for watching. I massively appreciate every single one of you who comes and watches these videos and gives me any feedback at all. I find it really helpful. Don't forget to follow us on all of the socials and take part in that giveaway. So you can submit your entry by 11 p.m. on Friday the 29th of January 2021. So make sure you do. Thank you, and I will see you next time. Bye.